The first time any human saw the haunted armada, it did not look like a curse. To the ISS iron-bound Aria's forward cameras, the Tethys Phalanx floated in stately formation beyond the shifting auroras of the umbral shoals. Countless hulls, silver and midnight, suspended against a background of distorted stars. Drive rings hung motionless. Weapons collapsed into standby positions. Docking pylons extended, as if waiting for crews that never came. On the bridge, Captain Rajan Holt watched the images scroll and tried to imagine silence thick enough to span decades. "Those are warships?" Hugo Menon wondered aloud. The young salvage technician leaned forward in his harness, eyes wide, a grin already trying to form. "They don't even look scratched." "They were not lost in battle," Mireille Darbo said quietly from her station. As cultural historian, she had been up late, reading every Thalri archive fragment Holt could legally pry loose. The mantle calls it an estrangement of vessels. Not a defeat, not a disaster, an estrangement. Dalit Kinte, at helm, snorted softly. "I have never heard anyone use that word for throwing away an entire fleet." Rajan remained silent. He thought of the briefing on Caligost Otrion, the way Archdelegate Safan Kaar's hands had stayed perfectly still while his throat plates pulsed with repressed agitation. The Thalri statesperson had never once said haunted, but the meaning had seeped into every caution. "You will find anomalous sensor echoes aboard," he had told them. "You will hear things. These are not persons. They are remnants, dangerous to touch, cruel to preserve. Your task is salvage of material and nothing more." The contract had been lucrative enough that human leadership had not pressed harder. But Holt had seen the way Kaar's gaze slid sideways, the way his fingers trembled when he signed. Now, the spectral blue outline of the Thalri flagship, HSS Highwater, floated at the center of the display. The iron-bound Aria's docking grapples extended like cautious fingers. "Doctor," Soraya Illich's voice came over the internal channel from the forward lab. "Captain, I'm getting live phase variance readings from Highwater's hull. The drive lattice is still partially active." "I thought they stripped any experimental cores?" Holt said. "They stripped what they could physically reach." He heard the restrained excitement under her clinical tone. "What I'm seeing is not hardware. It's pattern, field geometry. We are going to want a closer look." Rajan considered the shadowed hulls ahead. The Thalri had entrusted humans with the final dismantling because humans, in the eyes of the older polities, were still half foolish, half ignorant, willing to take risks in exchange for resources and contracts. They expected him to do exactly what the contract said. Cut these ships apart. Melt them down. Forget what they had once been. "Bridge to all hands," he said at last. "We are arriving at Highwater. Proceed under standard dock and lock. No wandering, no unapproved experiments. Soraya, you'll get your closer look, but we follow safety protocol. No exceptions." He meant to believe that. He meant not to stoke a ghost story that had already burned through half the sector. The docking maneuver went nominally. Dalit eased the iron-bound Aria's prow against a Thalri-designed latch that had not been used in decades. Magnetic fields hummed, guided by Kaito Fujiwara's precise sensor corrections. The ships kissed hull to hull with a soundless shudder. "Dock secure," Dalit reported. "Pressure locks nominal, seal confirmed, tether established." Even through layers of composite and vacuum, Holt felt the faint tug, as if something older and larger had put a hand on the Aria's shoulder. "Boarding teams, report to Airlock 1, he said. "Soraya, Hugo, Mireille, you're with me." He paused. "And bring the resonance rig." There was a beat of static before Soraya replied. "I did not think you would approve that, Captain." "I do not approve it," he said. "I am tolerating it. Bring it anyway." He cut the channel and stood, feeling his knees argue about the last long acceleration burn. The bridge smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air. Above the forward panes, the umbral shoals writhed, a region of space where gravity and plasma tangled in slow, luminous knots, distorting light into ribbons that looked like torn auroras. Somewhere in that shimmering chaos, the Tethys Phalanx had tested a new kind of engine and slipped sideways out of normality. Kaito caught his look as Holt passed his station. "Phase echo fluctuation just spiked along Highwater's dorsal spine, Captain." It's synchronized with our own field coils. As in, reacting to us? As in anticipating us, Soraya's voice cut in, closer now, as she stepped onto the bridge with a sealed equipment case in her arms. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight knot. Her eyes were too bright. Feels like the ship is paying attention. That's impossible, Hugo Menon muttered as he joined them, but his own gaze kept drifting to the forward view, as if waiting for one of the Thalri hulls to blink. Rajan holstered his sidearm out of habit, though he doubted it would do much against whatever waited inside Highwater. He had read the logs of Thalri boarding crews, tools drifting, airlocks cycling themselves, a half-seen figure in a corridor mirror. No physical injuries, no measurable toxins, only panicked withdrawals and a growing political storm. He intended to be the last captain sent to deal with this, one way or another. The airlock cycle took a full minute. Old Thalri mechanisms complained as human software nudged them into movement. Atmosphere equalized with a hiss, and the inner hatch of Highwater's main docking bay unlocked itself before Dalit could manually prompt it. That's welcoming, Hugo said under his breath. They stepped through together into the gloom of the alien flagship. Lights along the bay's vaulted ceiling flickered on in sequence, as if responding to their presence. The bay was cavernous, sized for shuttles larger than the Arya. Gravitic plates hummed faintly under their boots. The air smelled faintly of ozone and metal dust, but not rot, not decay. Power draw is minimal, Kaito reported over comm from the Arya's bridge. But I'm reading live. Current in primary conduits. Who's routing it? Holt asked. Unknown. A pause. There's no recognized biological mass aboard, Captain. No active Thalri. No human life signs except your team. Just this ambient variance. Like static with rhythm. Soraya set down the equipment case and knelt, opening it with quick, practiced motions. Inside lay a compact device wound with coils and lattice crystal. No larger than a field generator, but crowded with handmade adjustments. Thin cables coiled away from it like roots. Hugo frowned. That's the resonance lantern? Thought it would look more shiny. It is shiny, Soraya said, but not in wavelengths you can see. She placed the device on the deck and connected a cable to a power cell on her belt. Status lights flickered to life, running through a color sequence that no commercial standard would have recognized. Soraya's personal codes. Holt knew, her way of speaking to machines. Captain, we are still within science, she said very softly, but at the edge of it. Explain. The Mantle's reports mentioned recurring sensor echoes that line up with the original crew's biometrics and positions their last recorded locations before the phase echo drive. Failure. Those echoes have persisted, weak but organized, years longer than any random interference should. She adjusted dials, each motion economical. The Thalri assumed these were unstable, decaying. I think they are stable. I think their experimental drive anchored their minds to the ship's field geometry, even as their bodies were torn across folded space. Hugo stared. You think the crew is still here? As what? Patterns? Conscious patterns, she said. This device will project a field tuned to those echoes, increasing their ability to interact with normal matter. In theory. Last chance to back out, Holt said. If this goes wrong, the Thalri will say we violated contract. Mireille, who had been quietly recording every surface carving and stencil in the bay, looked up. If Soraya is right, then Kaar ordered us to erase living minds while calling them leftovers. The Mantle's words do not change that. Rajan remembered Kaar's warning about cruelty in preserving echoes. He also remembered the small tremor in the archdelegate's hand. Do it, he said. Lantern on. Soraya thumbed a final control. The device's core brightened with a deep, colorless light that made Holt's teeth ache. The air around it shimmered. For a moment, nothing else changed. Then the bay's shadows sharpened. Lines along the walls brightened, as if the ship's own circuits had decided to outline themselves. A fine dust of luminescence swirled at the edge of vision, pulling into vague humanoid shapes that flickered, broke apart, and reformed. Holt did not blink. Years of command training held him still even as his skin prickled. One of the shapes stabilized. It coalesced at the far end of the bay's open floor, tall, four-limbed, proportions reminiscent of Thalri physiology but blurred at the edges, as if its outline did not fully adhere to 3 dimensions. Plates of what might have been ceremonial armor shimmered across its chest, phasing in and out of visibility. When it moved, the air made a sound halfway between static and whisper. Seryn swallowed. For the first time since they left Calighost Otrion, her hands shook. The spectral figure inclined its head, the gesture eerily crisp compared to its wavering form, and projected a thought. It did not speak through air or speaker. Instead, Holt felt the impression directly in his cortex, not as words, but as a pattern that his mind obligingly translated, tones, concepts, half-remembered Thalri phrases from language drills. Docking bay, primary access point, unauthorized presence. The thought was sharp as a scolding. Hugo flinched. Mireille made an involuntary sign of greeting from an old Earth culture, then caught herself. "We are authorized," Holt said, willing his own thoughts into calm neutrality. He did not know if the thing could hear his mind, but Seryn had argued that thought itself left a faint field signature. "We are salvage crew," contracted by the Thalri's mantle. The figure's outline tightened, as if focusing. Mantle. Still exists. Yes. Holt sensed a pressure in the air, like storm tension. You were part of it. Images flickered across his mind, not his own. A gleaming new fleet, sliding out from a Thalri shipyard. Banners of pure light, arching overhead. Excited technicians locking the final components of an experimental drive into place. Pride in the angle of hull plating, the symmetry of formation. Then panic, alarms warbling in tones that scraped bone, space tearing sideways. The impressions receded with an almost physical snap. Seryn's voice, hushed but steady, slipped into the moment. "Can you identify yourself?" The figure flickered, resolved. A name. Seryn. The translation was approximate, sunken into human phonemes. A rank followed, nested in the thought. Captain, Commander, responsible for lives and metal. HSS Highwater, Seryn projected. Commanding mind, still functioning. Holt's spine locked. The flagship's captain, still here, or enough of them to claim identity. "I am Captain Rajan Holt of the ISS Ironbound Aria," he replied aloud, letting the translation overlays in his headset feed his words into Thalri grammatical frameworks. "We came because your government believed Highwater and the ships with her were lost." He did not say forsaken. "Lost," Seryn echoed, and now the thought carried a sour heat. "We were ordered to test the phase echo drive. We obeyed. We crossed the shoals. Every variable computed. Every ritual observed. Drive engaged at designated coordinates." Then the bay shuddered, with remembered force. For an instant, Holt saw 2 decks overlaid, one clean and silent, the other full of screaming, armored Thalri wrenching at panels that no longer touched their hands. "Bodies torn from world," Seryn projected. "Matter dispersed along broken harmonics. But memory sails." A flash of intricate lattice folded into hull plating. Resonant cores held the imprint. "We remain, intensive, compressed, tethered." Mireille was trembling now, scrib stylus forgotten in her hand. Her academic mind was racing ahead, collecting implications. Thalri theology, their belief in a living stream of consciousness, moving through generations, now confronted with actual disembodied minds. Hugo took an involuntary step closer to the lantern. "You've been stuck here this whole time? Awake?" Seryn turned, gaze passing through Hugo but pausing anyway, as if mapping the outline of his presence. "Time is different," the captain replied. "We exist in constant moment, a stretched breath. But yes, we wait. We cannot disengage from the lattice. Without it, we dissolve into the shoals. With it, we are bound to metal that no longer moves." Holt understood, with a sudden, angered clarity, why Thalri boarding crews had fled this place. Not because ghosts pushed tools around, but because the weight of those eyes, those minds, had been too much to bear. "You tried to tell them," he said, When their teams came aboard to inspect, you tried to communicate. Communications were blocked by fear. Seryn's outline flared, then dimmed. Mantle priests declared us aberration, disturbance, not to be engaged. To do so would trap us. A bitter echo of formal ritual phrasing. They chose mercy by abandonment. Mireia bit off a curse in her native language. Soraya's jaw set. Holt considered. On one level, he understood the Thalri reaction. A people whose spiritual life centered on the proper flow of mind through birth and death would not easily accept a mind trapped in machinery. But understanding did not excuse. Your government has ordered us to dismantle these ships, he said. They think scrapping the hulls will free you. The temperature seemed to drop. Even Hugo, who barely followed Thalri doctrine, felt it. We are the hulls, Seryn answered. Our patterns have braided into memory sails, field coils, deck circuits. To cut the metal is to cut us. To shred the lattice is to discard our last existence into blind noise. The thought carried, for the first time, a tremor of fear. Soraya exhaled slowly. Captain, we can't pretend to misunderstand. If we proceed as ordered, we kill them. They know it. The Thalri know it. And tell themselves it is release, Mireia murmured. It is easier to pretend you are burning paper charms than living brains. Hugo, who had grown up in an orbital scrapyard cutting derelicts apart for food money, stared at the shimmering outline of Seryn and felt for the first time that maybe his work could be something other than destruction. What if we don't scrap you? He blurted. What if we help you move? Seryn's attention, such as it was, swung fully to him. Move? The captain repeated. Out of here, Hugo said. You said you're bound to your ship, right? But the ship is bound to nothing now. You've got engines, guns, a hull haunted. He stopped himself just in time. A whole lot of metal the Thalri are too scared to touch. We're not. Hugo, Holt said. But there was no heat in it, only warning. We came with a contract, Soraya said, picking up the thread. But contracts can be changed. Our governments thought they were buying scrap. We have found ship mines, persons. We have laws about this. We can offer something the mantle would not. Seryn's form brightened, edges sharpening with a kind of wary hunger. Offer recognition, Soraya said. Not as artifacts, as a people. The Lumen-human. She coined the name on the spot. It tasted strange in Holt's ears, like ritual and static combined. The lantern pulsed in sympathetic rhythm, as if the words themselves had weight. You would try to convince your kind that phase-anchored minds are people? Seryn's thought was laced with skepticism. You barely understand us. We understand exploitation, Mireia said dryly. Our species has been on the receiving end of it for a long time. We promised ourselves we would do better when it was our turn to choose. Rajan looked at the spectral captain. A new, dangerous idea had begun to crystallize behind his measured gaze. It ran counter to everything his orders prescribed, and yet aligned perfectly with his instinct. We do more than convince, he said. We hire you. Silence fell in the bay. Even the hum of grav plates seemed to recede. Explain, Seryn demanded. Holt spread his hands, human palms bare in Highwater's dim light. Your fleet was built to fight, to explore, to serve as the sharp edge of Thalri ambition. Now it sits here as scrap because your people cannot bear what they made of you. Humans, on the other hand, he allowed himself the tiniest smile. We are very good at working with things that scare other civilizations. We will not cut your ships apart. We will work with you. You crew the Phalanx with your Lumen-human. We handle physical tasks, advocacy, diplomacy. You get agency and a say in your fate. We get allies with capabilities no one else has. On your terms, Seryn said. On negotiated terms. Samira Albaz's voice cut in from holtzwrist.com. She had listened in silence until now, from the Aria's small diplomatic hub, taking notes. Captain, if we are about to upend half the region's law, I would appreciate being looped in formally. Holt tapped his comm. You are looped. Get to docking bay 1. I'm already suiting, she replied, and drafting. The Thalri will not accept this, Mireille said softly. Then we do not begin with their acceptance, Holt replied. To Seryn, he said, you are owed at least the choice. In the quarters, Archdelegate Kaar had taken on Caligost Otrion's Thalri wing. Alarms chimed. They were subtle, private notices routed to secured channels, cloaked with polite tones. But the content was anything but. Unauthorized field excitation aboard Highwater, the alert read. Persistence of anomalous signatures exceeds thresholds. Human equipment deployed. Kaar's throat plates fluttered in distress. He dismissed his staff with a curt gesture and sealed the room, his joints aching as pressure doors took hold. He had pushed for this compromise, maneuvered factions within the mantle to accept the outsourcing. Let the impulsive newcomers handle the cursed fleet. Let them declare it salvage. Let the Thalri wash their hands of a spiritual catastrophe without admitting openly to breach of doctrine. Now the newcomers were doing exactly what his opponents had warned, meddling. He called up an encrypted feed. Grainy, delayed imagery from a small drone aboard Highwater showed a cluster of humans standing around a glowing device. In the background, something flickered, like a heat mirage, in the shape of an officer he had once met in a corridor full of celebration. Seryn. Kaar's claws dug into the armrest. He had signed Seryn's commission orders, attended the inclusion ceremony when Highwater's drive core was dedicated, stood at a distance as the Tethys Phalanx sailed away, surrounded by cheering bands of light. He heard Seryn's name intoned now in mantle halls, as an example. One who had embraced abomination unwittingly, whose mind was trapped in perverse half-life. He had never believed the priests when they said true consciousness could not occupy such lattice work. He had believed something far worse, that it could. The human captain was making gestures of greeting. The resonant device pulsed. The spectral outline of Seryn seemed to lean in. "We do not engage," Kaar whispered, echoing an old policy meeting. "We do not engage." His hands shook. Eventually, he forced himself upright and linked to the mantle's secure council channel. "The humans have made contact," he said, voice level through sheer discipline. "We must prepare for a future in which our dead are no longer silent." On the umbral shoals, that future arrived faster than anyone expected. Within a day, Highwater's internal corridors hummed with low, barely audible whispers. Resonance lanterns, being hastily replicated by Soraya and Igor Beale using whatever components they could strip from the Aria's labs, dotted key junctions like strange stars. Lumen eidolons emerged where the lantern's reach extended, faint at first, then increasingly defined. Some appeared in uniforms, others in work gear, a few in the simple wraps of non-combat technicians. All carried the same wide-eyed, slowed-down astonishment. The look of someone stepping into a half-familiar room after what felt like a long sleep. Hugo found himself followed by a cluster of engineering eidolons when he went to inspect Highwater's reactor bay. They gathered at the edges of his vision, their outlines wavering where walls and machinery intersected their anchor patterns. He had never been so acutely aware of where he put his feet, where his breathing mask vented. "You were going to cut this." One of them projected, its tone oddly conversational. "Yeah," Hugo admitted. "Running a scanner along a conduit. That was before we knew it was also you." A dozen overlapping impressions traveled through his mind. Surprise, bitter amusement, a faint wash of gratitude that embarrassed him as if someone had thanked him for not committing a crime. "We can adjust those couplings more precisely than you," another eidolon said. "Our perception is not bound by angles. We see field lines directly." "Show me," Hugo said. They did. He learned to stand very still while luminous hands passed through the same space his arms occupied, rerouting invisible currents. When they asked him to physically toggle a switch or reseat a bolt, he did so, trusting their intangible guidance rather than the readings on his wrist display. Within hours, Highwater's reactor, which Thalri engineers had judged too unstable to reactivate, hummed with steady power. On the bridge, Dalit sat at tactical, watching as ghostly silhouettes drifted around her, leaning over controls they could not press. Feels like being haunted by expert consultants, she muttered. One Eidolon gently corrected her impression of an attitude thruster calibration. She blinked as the ship's virtual horizon stabilized. Right, she admitted aloud. You fly better than me inside this ship. Noted. We lack the ability to push against normal vacuum, the Eidolon replied. We require you to move physical interfaces, external shutters, material elements. We can control fields, not mass. Which is why you need us, Dalit said. And why we need you. Fine. We do this together. She felt something like a nod in her mind. Rajan moved through the flagship like an observer in someone else's dream. Everywhere he went, the air trembled with overlapping Lumen voices. They did not all agree with Seryn. Some argued that humans could not be trusted, that any bargain was simply a slower form of dismantling. We cannot go backward, one of those skeptics told him in a corridor lined with inactive drones. We will never be Thalri again. We will not become human property. I am not offering ownership, Holt said. He held up a compact module Samira had given him, a small, plain device containing the latest draft of the Lumen Compact. I am offering a contract, a treaty, between equals. You say equals, the Eidolon replied. But your species controls material infrastructure. You breathe, excrete, grow. We do not. Our existence can be ended by a switch. How is that equal? Holt did not flinch. We are also vulnerable to vacuum, to heat, to Thalri politics, to Orthis missiles. We each bring something critical. You bring presence in fields, perception beyond matter, direct integration with systems. We bring embodiment, industrial base, political weight, and mouths. Mouths to speak on your behalf in councils you cannot attend, to shout when others would prefer silence. The Eidolon's outline shivered with wry amusement. You are very human. I am, Holt said. I want that to work in your favor. In Caligost Otrion's neutral concourse, Velen Loom traders twisted their slender necks toward the latest rumor feeds. Images of flickering shapes aboard Thalri hulls looped endlessly, overlaid with human salvage logos and breathless speculation. Specters turned soldiers, one caption read. Humans ally with the dead. Velan strategists did not believe in actual spirits. They believed in advantage. An entire armada, crewed by quasi-intangible entities, that could pass through bulkheads and perceive field gradients directly represented an advantage. Purchase? One junior strategist suggested. Too crude, her elder replied. The Thalri would view that as theft, the humans as poaching. We need them to come to us. Offer asylum, another voice proposed. We have room in our cluster for anchored mines. We could embed them in our own hulls, after humans do the difficult work of legitimizing them, the elder said, throat cords vibrating in a chuckle. Yes, let the reckless species break doctrine first. Orthis Gyre warlords, farther out on ragged borders, had neither patience for theology nor appetite for contracts. They saw only that the Thalri and humans were moving together around the umbral shoals, that chatter spiked around words like haunted and invincible, and that unexplained power signatures flared where sensors reported only derelicts. If something existed that could tilt the balance of power, Orthis logic dictated it must be seized or destroyed. Krann Vesk, warlord of a splintered Gyre faction, stood on his flagship's observation deck and watched tactical projections of the shoals twist across a holographic sphere. So the dead fly again, he said, tusked jaw splitting in what passed for a grin. We will see if they bleed. He ordered ships to assemble, skimming the edges of treaties he already held in contempt. Back aboard Highwater, Samira Albaz convened a meeting in a repurposed wardroom. The room had no chairs suited to Thalri physiology, so humans sat in their own portable seats around a long table. Resonance lanterns glowed at each end, bathing the compartment in soft, pearly light. In that light, Lumen Eidolons gathered. They did not sit. They hovered, separated from one another by subtle differences in hue and density. Seryn's presence was the clearest, the most coherent. As of today, Samira began, we have confirmation that at least 2 other polities are adjusting their strategies around your existence. Velen Loom has sent discreet feelers for contact. Orthis gyre ships are massing beyond the shoals. Why? An Eidolon asked. Because you represent power, she answered. The Phalanx is a fully functional armada with unusual capabilities. Everyone either wants that advantage or fears it. And the Thalri? Seryn asked. Samira flicked a finger, and a small icon appeared at the edge of the table display. The sigil of the Thalres mantle. Beside it, an amber indicator pulsed uncertainly. They are divided, she said. Some would destroy you to restore doctrinal purity. Others see tactical necessity. A few, very few, see you as we do, as people with a right to determine your own fate. You have a plan, Seryn said. The thought carried not exactly sarcasm, but the seasoned skepticism of someone who had sat through too many briefings in life. Samira smiled thinly. I have a proposal. Holt watched her, privately appreciating yet again why he had requested her specifically for this mission. In the early days of human contact with the Thalri, she had been one of the few diplomats willing to read their doctrine without either contempt or uncritical reverence. She understood how to turn another culture's myths into legal frameworks. Our contract framework, what I am calling the Lumen Compact, does 3 things, she said. First, it recognizes you as a distinct people, not as an anomaly of Thalri citizenship. Second, it declares your host vessels to be sovereign extensions of that people under your collective decision. Third, it establishes humans as your primary material interface and advocate in exchange for your partnership in certain operations. Operations, one Eidolon repeated. The word tasted of battle deployments. Defense, chiefly, Samira said. But we are not naive. You were built as a strike force. Your abilities make you uniquely suited to certain kinds of conflict. If you agree, we will go into at least one engagement together to force the rest of the galaxy to recognize you cannot be quietly erased. Use us to prove we exist, Seryn summarized. Use each other, Samira corrected. We cannot do this without you. You cannot do this without us. This is ugly, but it may be necessary. And if we refuse? Another Lumen asked, this one flickering more faintly, as if its anchor had drifted. Then we take you out of here as best we can, Holt said. Hide you, argue for you, but without a demonstration, the mantle will say we hallucinated you. The Velan will whisper and wait. The Orthis will pounce anyway. And sooner or later, someone will cut power to your lattice in the name of mercy or fear. Silence, thick and charged, settled over the room. In that silence, Holt's thoughts skated to the young volunteers he knew he could call on, to Hugo's wide eyes, Dalet's steady hands, Kaido's curiosity, always probing, to Soraya's stubborn insistence that curiosity without courage was nothing. Seryn's outline brightened. We were once the most advanced strike fleet the Mantle could build, the captain said. Then we were banished to myth. You offer us a final campaign, with terms. Yes, Holt said simply. A slow, resonant chord reverberated through the Lumen gatherings. Agreement, disagreement, fear, hope. Soraya's instruments could have mapped it as a waveform, but she did not need to. The emotional weight was obvious. Finally, Seryn projected, We accept the compact, provisional upon your behavior. Samira nodded. Terms will be recorded, she said. The first signatures will be yours and ours. Later, we will seek additional signatories. Thalri, Velen, perhaps even Orthis, though I am not holding my breath. Where? Seryn asked. We cannot leave our lattice. We cannot walk your stations. We will bring the treaty to you, Holt said. But we will also bring your presence to the wider galaxy. The planning that followed pulled in every strand of ingenuity the iron-bound Arya's crew possessed. Soraya and Igor pushed the limits of their small labs, designing portable resonance anchors that could support Lumen manifestations outside their original hulls for short periods. These devices would allow a limited number of eidolons to accompany human envoys physically, bound to compact cores carried in armored cases. The Thalri authorities, when informed of this detail through official sanitized channels, reacted with a mix of horror and fascination. "You propose to unleash trapped minds onto neutral ground," one mantle conservative exclaimed during a council call. "You will contaminate every ritual hall they pass." Samira, present on the call as a human observer, kept her expression carefully neutral. "We propose to introduce citizens who happen to be phase-anchored. Contagion is a theological category, not a physical one." Kaar, who sat stiffly on the council's edge, said nothing. He knew it was already too late to prevent some form of contact. The moment Seryn had looked into a human's eyes and been heard, the old solving of the problem turned ships into scrap had become morally radioactive. Lumen declared themselves willing to host a summit at Caligost Otrion. The station's administrators, equal parts mercantile and opportunistic, smelled history in the making and cleared a central hall. They did not fully grasp what it would mean to stand in a room where the dead signed their names. On the appointed day, at precisely 2 local station time, the hall's lighting dimmed. Representatives of the Thalri's mantle, Lumen, Orthis Gyre, and the nascent human fleet took their places around a holotable set with neutral insignia. In the center, a flat crystal slab waited, etched with lines for biometric signatures and, newly added, fields for non-biological pattern imprint. Rajan Holt walked in at Samira's side, dressed in formal dark uniform, his posture steady. Behind them came 2 sailors carrying a resonance core between them, its surface wrapped in dull protective material. Whispers rippled through the hall. Some of the Thalri tucked their hands into their robes as if gripping hidden talismans. At a cue from Soraya, who stood at a discreet console in a side alcove, the sailors set the core down on a prepared dais and stepped back. Soraya activated a local field. The air above the core rippled. A shape began to condense, at first like heat above metal, then like fog with edges. Finally, Seryn stood between the delegates, spectral armor gleaming faintly. Gasps flared around the hall. One Valan delegate raised a hand in fascinated greeting. An Orthis representative pretended indifference, but shifted his weight subtly backward. Archdelegate Safan Kaar's eyes locked on Seryn's form. The captain inclined their head in a formal Thalri greeting. "Kaar," Seryn projected. The word carried layers. Old respect, betrayal, something like sad amusement. "We survive." Kaar's throat plates paled. "You were meant to move on, Seryn," he whispered. "We were meant to." A brief, spectral shrug. "We did not. We improvise." Samira stepped to the holotable. "We are here to sign the Lumen Compact," she said, her voice amplified just enough to carry, recognizing the Lumen eidolons as a distinct people and setting terms for cooperation. Holt thought he saw Kaar's hands tremble again. The archdelegate glanced at the mantle's conservative bloc, then back at Seryn and the humans. "My government is not prepared to sign," Kaar said slowly. "Our doctrine cannot adapt so quickly, but we will not obstruct the process. We will observe." "Observation is better than obstruction," Samira said. "For today, that will do." She and Holt pressed their palms to the crystal slab, leaving living prints that sparkled for a moment. Soraya adjusted a dial, and the field around Seryn changed frequency. The Lumen captain reached out, hand passing through the slab, but the resonance core below recorded a complex interference pattern. On the crystal surface, their imprint appeared as a soft, shifting web of light. The first signature of a mind not bound to flesh. Lumen signed next, cautious but eager to be on the right side of whatever came next. Orthis Gyre's representative, to everyone's mild surprise, scratched a few rough symbols on the periphery, muttering about the value of recognizing enemies officially. The Thalri did not sign. They did not have to. The galaxy had already registered what had happened. Krann Vesk watched the broadcast from his flagship's tactical pit and felt a complex mix of envy and fury. "They made a treaty with phantoms," he snarled, while we waited. "Ezer, this is Ad. To storm into that hall would have been unwise," his second-in-command said carefully. "The Valan would have turned weapons on us. The humans as well. Even the Thalri." Krann spat a curse in his own language. We do not need their permission to take what we need. Prepare the fleet. We attack the shoals. If we seize one of these anchored mines, we learn its secret. If we destroy it, we deny them their advantage." His officers bowed and moved to obey. The attack came 3 days later, long enough for the Lumen to settle into their new name, but far too soon for anyone's comfort. Sensors on the edge of the umbral shoals flared as Orthis warships slipped out of folded space, their hulls bristling with weapon arrays tuned for brute force engagements. They barreled toward the region where Highwater and her sister ships had begun to flex their reawakened systems. On the iron-bound Arya's bridge, Kaito's voice rose over a chorus of alarms. "Multiple contacts. Closing fast. Orthis profiles confirmed. They're burning hot. No pretense of negotiation." "Of course not," Delete muttered, already plotting intercept vectors. The Arya's mass was nothing next to Highwater's, but it could dance. They see a light, and they charge at it. Holt stood in the center of the bridge, hands folded behind his back. His heart thudded with a familiar mix of fear and clarity. Command had never gotten easier, only more specific. "Status of the Phalanx?" he asked. Voices answered not only over comm, but directly in his mind, overlapping and then synchronizing as Seryn and other Lumen tied into the Arya's limited resonance web. "Drives at 30%, Seryn reported. "Weapons arrays calibrated, field lattices stable. We can maneuver within the shoals more freely than any matter-bound vessel, meaning you can go where Orthis cannot target reliably," Holt said. "Yes, if you guide the physical components." He nodded once. "Then we show the galaxy what you can do." Admiral Emmerich Vass's face appeared on the main screen, projected from his distant command cruiser. His lips were pressed thin. "Captain Holt," he said, wasting no time, "I have your report. I have the compact records. I have a half-dozen angry messages from Mantle officials and Valan traders, and I have an Orthis armada heading straight for your position." "Understood, Admiral," Holt said, requesting authorization to deploy the Tethys Phalanx under joint human-Lumen command as a defensive force. Vass's eyes flicked to the ghostly figures faint at the edge of the feed. He had insisted on maintaining a visual link after seeing his first Lumen manifestation, a way of reminding himself he still operated in a world of matter. "You are asking me to entrust a key battle to haunted ships run by experimental minds who have never fought in this configuration, with a crew of humans who barely understand how their allies work." "Yes," Holt said. He did not hedge. Vass's greatest respect, he knew, was reserved for captains who did not bargain with their own convictions. Vass exhaled. Some of the tension eased from his shoulders, replaced by the hard focus of a man making a decision he could not walk back. "Permission granted," he said. "You are to prevent Orthis from seizing or destroying the Phalanx. You are also to minimize collateral damage." "The galaxy is watching." "It usually is when we do something stupid," Holt replied, before he could stop himself. A flicker of amusement cracked Vass's sternness. "Do something brilliant instead," he said. "Vass out." Dalit snorted. "No pressure." Seryn's presence pressed closer in Holt's mind. "We suggest formation 379, the captain projected, an elegant arrangement of vectors and field overlaps unfurling across Holt's mental map. "We have used it before." "Against what?" Holt asked. "Thalri internal exercises," Seryn replied. "Simulated enemies. None of them could operate within the shoals themselves. The Orthis will fare no better. We, on the other hand." Highwater's silhouette turned gracefully on the main view, drive field blooming in a pattern that made Soraya's instruments sing with overtones. One by one, other ships of the Phalanx lit up, cruisers, escorts, hulking siegecraft, their Lumen cores now awake and eager. Holt felt their collective presence like a strange, low chorus in his bones. "Dalit," he said. "Match Highwater's vector. We ride their slipstream. Hugo, Igor, Soraya, prepare the hybrid link." On the lower decks, in a cramped compartment repurposed as a link chamber, Soraya and Igor moved with intense efficiency. They had adapted the resonance lantern design into a ring of standing modules, each tuned to project a focused field into a single chair. Thick neural bands waited coiled on each headrest, shimmering faintly as diagnostic currents ran. Hugo Menon stared at one of the chairs, trying not to think about the meld they were about to attempt. He had volunteered almost immediately when Soraya described the plan. So had Dalit and Kaito. "We are asking a lot of you," Soraya had said. "This is not simple telepresence. The lumen will ride your neural structure like a scaffolding. You will share space in your skull." Hugo had shrugged, though his stomach had fluttered. "We already share space with chemical depressants and old songs. What's one more thing?" Now, as he sat and let Igor strap him in, bravado felt thin. "You can back out," Igor said, adjusting the neural band around Hugo's temples. "We have enough volunteers." "Do you?" Hugo asked. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "You'll need someone who's comfortable improvising in machinery no one understands. That's me," Igor grunted. "You are reckless. Humans are reckless," Hugo corrected. "That's why we're the ones doing this." On the opposite side of the ring, Dalit settled into her own chair. Kaito strapped himself into a third, fingers already twitching in absent musician patterns, as if testing an invisible instrument. Soraya moved to the central console. "Lumen delegates, are you ready?" she asked, addressing the empty air. The air did not remain empty. Shapes coalesced above each chair. Not full-bodied eidolons, but fragments of presence, like gestures without hands. Each hovered above a human head, halo-like. "We are ready," Seryn said, their voice present in all three volunteers' minds at once. Behind them, other lumen murmured, eager and nervous. Soraya swallowed, eyes suddenly moist. "For the record," she said, "this is the first time in known history that a human nervous system will host a non-human mind pattern." She paused. "Voluntarily. Start the link." Holt's voice came over the intercom. Soraya's fingers danced over controls. The ring hummed. Light rose from the floor in soft spirals around each chair. Hugo felt pressure at the back of his skull, as if a door he had never noticed was being carefully opened. A cool presence slipped through, not invasive, but cautious. Images flooded him. The interior of Highwater seen from 100 angles at once. Thalri hands on controls, the sensation of a drive field resonating with the bones of a ship. He gasped. The presence flinched back, then carefully returned. "Breathe," the Lumen voice whispered inside him. This one was not Seryn. It was a quieter, more reserved presence. Someone who had spent their life in engineering pits, rather than on bridges. "You are not being overwritten. We are sharing." Hugo's panic ebbed. He let the images settle into the periphery of his perception. His own sense of self remained stubbornly, endearingly human. A body in a chair, a nervous system buzzing with adrenaline, the memory of Earth's distant sky. "Okay," he said aloud. "Okay, let's fly." On the bridge, Holt watched as Highwater's projected course wove through the churning pockets of distorted space like thread through a loom. The rest of the Phalanx fell into formation, their drive flares flashing in colors. Thalri eyes would have read as ritual banners. The Orthis ships approached like a fist. They unleashed a first volley of missiles and energy lances as soon as they came into range, trusting in brute force. The Phalanx did not meet them head-on. Guided by lumen perceptions and human intuition, the flagship's field generators flared in a pattern that pre-triggered the enemy warheads. The orbits of a dozen small pockets of warped space shifted subtly. Orthis missiles passed through those pockets at just the wrong angle, their targeting systems confused by sudden false trajectories. Explosions blossomed far from their intended marks. On Orthis bridges, officers barked in baffled anger. "They are altering the shoals," one snarled. "They cannot do that." "Apparently they can," his sensor officer snapped. "Their ships glow in wavelengths my instruments cannot categorize. Sir, this is not a normal engagement." Krann Vesk watched the tactical display glitch, recalibrate, glitch again. His tusked mouth twisted. "So the stories were not exaggerated," he said. "Very well, we adjust." He ordered a second wave, this one saturating space around the Phalanx, rather than targeting individual hulls. Holt felt the incoming pattern as a spike in the chorus of Lumen voices. Their perception of the shoals carried to him through the link with Highwater's captain like a second sight layered over his own. They are attempting to deny our maneuvering corridors, Seryn said. They think we are matter-bound. We are not, Holt said. Dalit, take us through. Where a normal fleet would have tried to dodge between the densest zones of distortion, the Phalanx plunged into them. Within each ship, Lumen teams reconfigured phase echo drive lattices not for translation across distances as originally designed, but for controlled bleeding into micro-offsets of local space. In effect, they blurred their vessel's effective cross-section. To outside observers, Highwater and her sisters seemed to stretch and compress like reflections in a funhouse mirror as they passed through the most turbulent eddies. Orthis targeting systems struggled to lock onto them. Missiles chased ghosts. Inside the hybrid link chairs, Hugo, Derelict, and Kaito sweated and shook. The Lumen presences borrowing their neural architecture did not feel inertia. Human bodies did. The stress of experiencing two contradictory senses of movement at once, one physical, one field-based, made stomachs roil and hearts race. Breathe, the engineering Lumen repeated in Hugo's mind. A mantra. Think of this as riding a storm. Your body does falling, we do weaving. Dalit's Lumen partner, an old Thalri pilot whose memories of atmospheric dogfights blended eerily with her own training in tight-orbit maneuvers, laughed in exhilaration as they slung their combined perception around incoming fire. Kaito, wired into sensor harmonics, saw more of the battle than anyone else. To him, the shoals became a lattice of color and density, each pocket of warped space a bead on an invisible string. Lumen analysis flowed along his optic nerves, turning incomprehensible gradations into intuitive paths. We can go there, he muttered, pointing to an empty patch of dark between two Orthis cruisers. Right through them. Explain, Holt demanded. Their formations assume we won't cut across the worst turbulence, Kaito said, eyes unfocused, seeing two layers of reality at once. But for the Lumen, those are highways. We can vanish from their firing arcs and appear where they do not expect us. A flanking move through the heart of the storm. Holt weighed the risk. The shoals were not a tame medium. A miscalculation could shred hulls or scatter Lumen anchors beyond retrieval. Do you trust it? He asked Seryn. Yes, the captain said without hesitation. This is what the phase echo drive was meant to do. Before it broke us, it is time we use it properly. Then do it, Holt ordered. All ships, follow Highwater's lead. Enter the heart of the shoals. Re-emerge behind their center. From Vass's distant command cruiser, the Phalanx's maneuver looked like madness. His human tactical officers muttered prayers and curses in equal measure. They're going to tear themselves apart, one said. Or they know something we don't, Vass replied. Watch. The Phalanx's icons on the tactical display slid into the densest patch of interference. For a breathless moment, their transponder signals shimmered and fragmented. Then they were gone. Orthis gunnery crews, who had been gleefully pouring fire into the region where human and haunted ships had last appeared, suddenly found themselves firing into empty turbulence. Where did they go? Krann Vesk roared. A voice from sensors replied, strangled, Sir. They are behind us. Highwater and her sisters emerged from the far side of the storm like ghosts sliding out of a wall. Their guns already tracked Orthis engines and weapon mounts. They fired not for maximum destruction, but for crippling effect. Energy lances knifed into engine housings, slagging thrust assemblies. Phase-tuned charges slipped along shield contours and detonated in relatively unarmored communication arrays. The Phalanx had had decades to replay the original accident in their minds. They knew how to break intricate systems without necessarily killing everyone inside. Within minutes, half the Orthis formation drifted, crippled, and tumbling, their fire sporadic and disorganized. Reorient, Krann shouted. Turn and engage. Ram them if you must. His flagship began its slow, bulk-driven rotation. One of the Phalanx cruisers let it turn. Highwater did not. Seryn guided the flagship on a direct intercept course. Holt understood the logic without even needing the Lumen feed. If they could remove Krann's flagship from effective command without annihilating it, he might be forced to listen. Target their primary batteries, Holt said. Disable. Do not destroy. Make it clear we are choosing restraint. Inside Highwater's weapon nodes, Lumen gunners shaped their fire with artistry born of frustration. They had spent decades unable to act, trapped in a moment of disaster. Now, unleashed, they moved with a terrible precision. Streams of energy lanced out, severing barrel assemblies, scraping away external armor, cracking sensor domes. The Orthis flagship's forward half became a jagged ruin, yet its core hull remained intact. Krann Vesk staggered as the deck rolled under him. Alarms howled in frequencies designed to jolt even a sleepy warlord. "Boarding parties," he began, but his second-in-command grabbed his arm. "Sir, their weapons are not targeting our core," she shouted over the din. "They are warning us." Krann's nostrils flared. He bared his teeth at the main display, where Highwater loomed larger and larger. "Warning us of what?" he snarled. As if in answer, a wideband transmission cut across all channels. It carried human words, Thalri intonations, and beneath both, the strange harmonic pulse of lumen projection. "This is Captain Rajan Holt of the ISS Ironbound Aria," Holt's voice said, translated in real time. "And Captain Seryn of Highwater. Your forces are disabled. We can finish this. We choose not to," Krann spat. "You cannot dictate." The message continued, ignoring him. "We are demonstrating two things," Holt said. "First, that the Lumen eidolons exist and are not helpless myths. Second, that they will not be used as instruments of slaughter by anyone. Not the Thalri, not us, not you." On Orthis and Thalri and Valand screens across the sector, the image feeding with Holt's words showed Highwater holding position, guns still trained, yet silent. Krann's jaw worked. He was a warlord raised in cultures that rewarded ruthless decisiveness, but he was not a fool. If he ordered another assault, half his remaining ships might not even get weapons online before the Phalanx tore them apart. "We retreat," his second-in-command whispered. "We cannot win this. If we live, we can plan." Krann glared at her, then at the icon representing Highwater. It flared with strange shifting colors, the visible artifact of Lumen presence. "You fight wrong," he growled at the image, knowing Holt could hear him. "You could have burned us and taken our ships. Instead, you lecture." "Perhaps we fight different," Holt replied, his voice dry. "There are already enough examples of what happens when power is used only to crush." Krann barked a harsh laugh despite himself. "Humans," he said, the word a grudging mixture of respect and disgust. "You will make poor enemies and interesting neighbors." He cut the channel and gave the only order his pride could stomach. "Signal the fleet," he said. "We withdraw. Broadcast. We were injured by trickery, not beaten by skill." His officers did not contradict him. They were too busy saving what remained of their engines. As Orthis ships limped away, the Phalanx held position. Damage reports filtered through the hybrid link. Highwater had taken hits. Sections of hull along the port side had been shredded. In those regions, memory sails had burned out, field geometry destabilized. The Lumen anchors there screamed in voices that were not sound. "We are losing people," Seryn said tightly. "Can we stabilize?" Holt asked. "Possibly, if we redistribute lattice, but that will require rerouting our own presence. Some of us will thin." Hugo, still in the link chair, felt his engineering partner strain, their attention splitting apart to patch-torn connections. The mental sensation was like watching someone plug leaks in a dam with their own fingers. "Take what you need," Hugo whispered, tears he had not expected blurring his sight. "We can help rebuild later." "You will try," the Lumen replied. "That is more than some ever would." Outside, smaller Phalanx vessels darted among the damaged Orthis hulks, not to board or loot, but to stabilize, spin, and broadcast coordinates for rescue tugs. The battle would be remembered not only for its weird physics, but for the way its victors refused to become butchers. From his distant cruiser, Admiral Vass let out a slow breath he had not realized he'd been holding. "They did it," one of his officers said, half awed. "With ghosts. With allies," Vass corrected. He looked at Holt's exhausted face on the after-action feed, at the pale, flickering outlines of Lumen-eidolons hovering over ruined decks, at human volunteers slumped in link chairs, sweat-soaked and wide-eyed. "They just changed the rules," he murmured. "Now we have to live with them." After the battle, the galaxy did not swing instantly into harmony. The Thalri's mantle convened emergency councils. Priests argued about whether the Lumen represented a corruption of the soul stream or a sanctioned anomaly. Some called for the immediate deactivation of all phase echo technology. Others whispered that perhaps the mantle had been given a test and failed it. Archdelegate Kaar, who had once signed Seryn's commission with pride, now found himself standing before a chamber of divided peers. "You allowed them to persist," one conservative accused. "You allowed humans to elevate them into a grotesque imitation of citizenry." Kaar's throat plates flared. "I allowed us not to commit oblivion twice," he said. "Once by accident, once by design. What we made of them was a horror. What they made of themselves in response is unexpected. But they fight for the mantle's borders, still. They preserved lives today. Orthis warships limp away instead of driving into our yards. We would be fools to destroy such an ally merely because they unsettle us." He knew he was arguing as much with his own past cowardice as with them. The humans had simply refused to look away. He could not pretend that took no courage. On Valon Loom stations, strategists updated their models. The Lumen Compact became a document of intense study. Trade networks adjusted to take into account that certain corridors near the Shoals now fell under the protection of an armada that could appear unpredictably within their depths. Orthis, Gyre, nursing bruised pride, regrouped. Some factions pushed for new weapons, specifically designed to disrupt Lumen anchors. Others wondered if it might be more interesting to negotiate, however grudgingly. On Caligast Otrion, a small, quiet annex was set aside and consecrated, not to any single faith, but to memory. Plaques lined the walls with names in Thalri script, those who had crewed the Tethys Phalanx before the accident. Beside them, newer etchings bore the name Lumen-eidolons in a dozen tongues. Some of the Thalri who came to that annex treated it as a shrine for the dead. Others, more daring, addressed the air and felt faint, answering touches on their minds. A few humans, Myrae among them, sat and recorded the whispered stories of eidolons who drifted in on portable resonance cores. They spoke of the moment their bodies had burst into a rain of molecular ash, of the endless echo of alarms, of the sensation of waking up, disembodied and anchored in the memory sails. "We thought we had been punished," one told Myrae, "for arrogance, for hubris. We thought perhaps the mantle had angered the universe, and we were the ones it kept in a bottle as a warning." "And now?" Myrae asked. "And now," the Lumen said, their outlines soft in the annex's dimness, "we think we were a lesson in a different sense. To you, to the Thalri, to the Velen, perhaps even to the Orthis. The universe seems to be saying, you are not done learning how to live together." On the ironbound Aria, day-to-day life resumed in fits and starts. Hugo Menon woke from the link chamber with a splitting headache and a head full of half-remembered Thalri songs. He found that he could sometimes sense the presence of his Lumen colleague, even without a lantern nearby, like the memory of someone humming in the next room. Dalit had nightmares for a while, reliving the moment of plunging into the Shoals from two perspectives at once. With counseling and patient explanations from her Lumen co-pilot, she learned to integrate the experiences without losing herself. Kaito, now more intimate with phase harmonics than any living human, spent his off shifts sketching new sensor configurations. His notes brimmed with ideas that might one day let humans navigate the Shoals with a fraction more of the Lumen's grace. Soraya, exhausted but incandescent with intellectual satisfaction, compiled her data on the hybrid link and sent it, encrypted, to trusted colleagues on Earth. She did not yet know what ethics boards would say about what she had done. She knew only that her volunteers had been informed and willing, and that without their courage, dozens more Orthis and perhaps Thalri lives would have ended. Rajan Holt sat alone in his cabin as the Aria cruised alongside Highwater, the stars a slow drift beyond the narrow viewport. He thought about orders and improvisation, about contracts and faith. He thought about the look in Seryn's eyes when the Lumen captain had signed the compact, about Kaar's haunted expression, about Krann's grudging respect. He thought about his own species, so eager to prove itself in the eyes of the older powers, and how that eagerness could so easily have turned into exploitation. It still could, he knew. Nothing they had signed or fought for today guaranteed that humans would always choose the harder, kinder path. But they had chosen it once. That counted. "Captain," Seryn's voice said softly in his mind, threading past the walls with ease through the Aria's limited resonance field. "We have been considering our next moves. Planning campaigns already?" Holt asked wryly. "Not only campaigns," Seryn replied. "We wish to visit places, see things, not only war. We have been anchored to these ships and to the Shoals for a very long time. We would like to see what your people call home, or at least your stations. Your moons, your oceans." Rajan imagined spectral shapes hovering over Earth's seas, over Martian plains, in the cramped bustle of orbital bazaars. He smiled. "We can arrange tours," he said. "We'll have to work out decorum. Some people may faint." "Some Thalri fainted when they saw us speak to you," Seryn noted. "They recovered, mostly." "Then we will start with sturdier types," Holt said. He leaned back, feeling the familiar creak of the chair under him, the beating of his heart, the faint vibration of engines that burned chemical fuel. Nothing as exotic as phase echoes. Beyond the hull, the umbral shoals shimmered. Deep within that turbulent region, new anomalies flickered and faded. Soraya had warned him that the original phase echo accident might not have been unique. The universe, once it discovered a trick, rarely used it only once. There might be other anchored mines out there, other experiments gone wrong, other fleets lost in half-space, waiting for someone foolish and compassionate enough to talk instead of run. "Do you regret this?" Seryn asked, almost idly. "Had you followed your orders, you would have had less trouble." "I have never liked less trouble," Holt said. "It tends to come with more cowardice." He knew fear. He carried it like everyone else. But he also carried the faces of Hugo, Dalit, Kaito, Soraya, Samira, Mirel, Igor, Admiral Vass, Archdelegate Kaar, Krann Vesk, the Velen strategists, the unnamed Lumen who had whispered in his volunteers' ears. A whole web of lives now slightly more tangled because humans had decided not to scrap a haunted fleet. "You could have run from us," Seryn said. "You did not. Maybe we saw ourselves in you," Holt replied. "We're also an experiment that went further than anyone expected, and we have this bad habit of hiring the universe's problems instead of burying them." Seryn's laughter, if it could be called that, rippled through the field. "Then perhaps," the Lumen captain said, "we have chosen our partners well." The iron-bound Aria and Highwater sailed on together, out of the shoals and into the wider night, a living ship and a haunted one, bearing between them a fragile new understanding. Somewhere ahead, trouble waited. So did possibility. Humanity, reckless and stubborn, steered toward both.